from the United Nations Security Council session over Sudan and South Sudan, as the United Nations Security Council is discussing now the situation in and the repercussions of the war in Sudan, and the humanitarian aid needed and the supplies needed for the Sudanese people, and also the conflict concerning the war in Sudan. Actually, the situation in Sudan have deteriorated after the rapid support forces have made control on Darfur, and also the deteriorating the situation and the security measures that is there trying to control the Darfur province. In Khartoum and the borders of Sudan, many Sudanese people were fleeing the country in order to find breakthrough or find safe nations in order to stay in, and especially most of the Sudanese people in Sudan have came to Egypt, feeling more secure in through the borders.
Injuries, marking a significant increase from the previous reporting period and somewhat of an increase if compared to the corresponding dry season last year. Thankfully, while intercommunal crime remains a challenge, it did not increase in comparison to last year's dry season. In Sector South, South Sudan People's Defense Forces and National Police Service personnel continue to maintain an unauthorized presence, including through checkpoints and the occupation of civilian infrastructures. Some were equipped with heavy weapons, which is inconsistent with the official commitment of the government of South Sudan to maintain Abie's demilitarized status. Following repeated engagements by UNISFA, the South Sudan government agreed to withdraw its troops from the Abyei area, though this has yet to occur. The continued presence of the rapid support forces in the northern part of Abyei, particularly around Goli, Difra, and surrounding areas, remained a serious concern. No direct attacks on civilians or UNISFA personnel were recorded during the period. The presence, however, of checkpoints, armed patrols, and incidents of intimidation, including of UN personnel, contributed to a climate of insecurity. The presence of an increased number of unauthorized armed actors, including those related to the conflict in Sudan, and the complex political dynamics in South Sudan, complicate the political context of Abyei. This only highlights the urgent need to deploy a deputy civilian head of mission to UNISFA. Despite these challenges, UNISFA maintained strong community engagement, conducted robust patrols, and sustained rapid response operations. It also continued weapons management activities, including the disposal of small arms, ammunition, and unexploded ordnance. Mine action activities improved freedom of movement and humanitarian access. However, the rate of arms proliferation continued to outpace confiscation efforts. Mr. President, the period under review marked a profound operational setback for the Joint Border Verification and Monitoring Mechanism. On 13 December 2025, at the Kadugli Logistics Base in the Sudan, 3 drone attacks launched within minutes of each other killed 6 peacekeepers from Bangladesh and injured 9 others. We wish to express our deepest condolences to the families of the victims, as well as to the people and the government of Bangladesh. Following the deterioration of the security situation in Sudan and the inability to guarantee personnel safety, UNISFA relocated and subsequently closed all joint border verification and monitoring mechanism team sites, suspending its physical presence in the safe demilitarized border zone for the first time since its establishment. The continued suspension of this mechanism constitutes a serious challenge to the demilitarization framework under the 2011 agreement. United Nations headquarters, in coordination with UNISFA, will soon submit to the parties options for United Nations support to the joint border verification and monitoring mechanism. It is clear that any effective and sustainable support will ultimately depend on renewed political engagement by the parties to honor their agreement and the resumption of joint political and security mechanism meetings. In addition, the immediate withdrawal of all unauthorized forces, including the South Sudan People's Defense Forces and the Rapid Support Forces from the Abyei area, remains essential. Mr. President, progress on the restoration of the rule of law remained limited during the reporting period. The Abyei Police Service has yet to be established. Both Sudan and South Sudan have expressed support for the deployment of the remainder of the authorized UN police component. In the absence of formal law enforcement institutions in Abyei, community protection committees shoulder the primary responsibility for policing, supported by UNISFA through training, mentoring, and co-location. While these mechanisms have mitigated risks, they are not a sustainable substitute for mandated policing arrangements. The human rights situation remained of concern. UNISFA documented violations involving sexual violence against minors, alongside abuses attributed to unauthorized actors. Accountability remained low, and access to education, health care, and livelihoods continued to be disrupted by insecurity and displacement. UNISFA continued to integrate women, peace, and security commitments across mandate delivery. Women's participation increased in patrols, community protection mechanisms, and migration-related dialogues, including at the pre-migration conference between the Ngok Denka and Miseria communities. Youth engagement initiatives strengthened leadership and peace building, although recruitment by armed groups remained a serious concern. Mr. President, turning to the humanitarian situation, the presence in Abyei of internally displaced persons increased significantly and is now estimated at 20,000. UNISFA maintained a protective presence at arrival sites and facilitated humanitarian access, while United Nations agencies and partners delivered assistance under difficult conditions. Implementation of the Abyei Joint Program advanced social cohesion, livelihoods, and protection, including support for women and youth-led economic initiatives, particularly among displaced communities. However, reduced funding and the contraction of agency presence in Abyei continued to erode peace dividends and basic service delivery. Mr. President, we would like to express our appreciation to the outgoing acting head of mission and force commander, Major General Robert Yawa Fram, and to welcome his successor, Major General Ganesh Shrestha, who assumed his duties upon arrival in the mission on 25th January this year. I also commend the Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, the personnel of UNISFA, and the United Nations country teams of Sudan and South Sudan for their continued professionalism and commitment to supporting peace, security and stability in Abyei under challenging conditions. I thank the members of the Security Council for their continued support to UNISFA. In conclusion, Abyei remains at a critical juncture. UNISFA continues to protect civilians and prevent escalation, but it cannot be a substitute for political resolve. Progress requires the resumption of bilateral mechanisms, the withdrawal of all unauthorized forces, the establishment of the Abyei Police Service, and renewed support from the African Union and the international community. Sustained engagement by this Council will remain essential to uphold the demilitarized status of Abyei and advance a durable political solution. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ms. Povey for her briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Guang Cong.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, thank you for the opportunity to brief the Council on the implementation of Resolution 2046, which addresses outstanding bilateral issues between Sudan and South Sudan, as well as the situation in South Kordofan and Blue Nile states. The relationship between Sudan and South Sudan continues to be determined by the war in Sudan and its regional humanitarian, security, and the political consequences. Given the geographical, historical, economic, and the political ties between the two countries, South Sudan is one of the neighboring countries most affected by these conflicts. Since the start of the war in Sudan in 2023, over 1.3 million Sudanese refugees and South Sudanese have fled to South Sudan. This massive influx has compounded an already dire humanitarian situation, increasing pressure on very limited access to food, basic health care, and education services in South Sudan. The war in Sudan has also posed serious challenges to South Sudan's security through cross-border movements of armed groups, weakened border control, and increased circulation of weapons. Mindful of its internal security and oil revenues, in December 2025, South Sudan managed to mediate a tripartite agreement with the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces to deploy South Sudan People's Defense Forces to secure the Higlik oil field. Despite episodic incidents, the agreement still holds but remains fragile, given the volatile context in Sudan. Mindful of the impacts of the war on both countries, the two governments sought to maintain a constructive bilateral relationship through high-level engagements and visits to Port Sudan and Juba in December 2025 and January of this year. These discussions focus on securing borders against the movements of armed groups, securing and opening the Higlik oil facility, maintaining oil exports and bilateral trade, and agreeing to form a joint economic committee to oversee coordination on these matters. Mr. President, Abyei's final status remains one of the most important unresolved issues between Sudan and South Sudan. Abyei continues to be severely affected by the war in Sudan, as it has received over 46,000 refugees and returnees, as well as IDPs, further stretching humanitarian needs beyond current capacity. The war in Sudan has also impeded the seasonal reverse migration of herders from Abyei towards the north, resulting in the provisional settlement of about 11,000 Misreya in Abyei. The ISF presence in the northern part of Abyei as a direct consequence of the Sudan conflicts and the SSPDF's continued presence in the southern parts of the Abyei continue in breach of existing agreements and Security Council resolutions on Abyei. These military activities in and around Abyei have significantly impeded the operations of UNISFA. In my meetings with government officials of Sudan and South Sudan in Khartoum and Juba during my recent visits in March and April, I reiterated the need for insulating Abyei from the conflicts in Sudan and challenges facing South Sudan, strengthening UNISFA's capacity to maintain security within the Abyei box, and resuming dialogue between Sudan and South Sudan on the final status of Abyei. I also called on the parties to allow for additional United Nations police units for UNISFA and the operationalization of Atoni airstrip to facilitate UNISFA's operations, mobility, and logistical support. In Khartoum, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, chairman of Sudan's Transitional Sovereignty Council and Commander-in-Chief of the Sudanese Armed Forces, stressed Sudan's commitments to a peaceful resolution in accordance with the 2011 agreement, and assured that Sudan is prepared to continue discussions on expanding joint measures to secure the Abyei area. In Juba, senior government officials conveyed President Kiir's commitments to advancing the Abyei file and making progress on the 5 benchmarks as required by the UN Security Council. Mr. President, it is encouraging to note that both governments of Sudan and South Sudan reiterated their commitments to advancing dialogue and reconvening the joint political and security mechanism. Officials from both sides of the Abyei Joint Oversight Committees also agreed to explore the feasibility of convening a virtual meeting to initiate preparations for future engagement. South Sudan authorities further agreed to include Abyei in their bilateral engagements with the Sudan counterparts. South Sudanese military officials also expressed willingness to withdraw the SSPDF forces from the southern parts of Abyei and requested the deployment of UNISFA forces to ensure security in the area. In my visits to Abyei last week, Abyei authorities, traditional leaders, civil society, and women and youth representatives expressed their serious concern over the lack of progress on the final status of Abyei, emphasizing the critical role that UNISFA has been playing in the protection of civilians and underscoring the urgent need for immediate deployments of additional AMPO to address growing law and order challenges. I encourage the local stakeholders to take proactive measures as a shared responsibility to demilitarize the Abyei area, noting that a secure environment is the foundation for sustainable peace and continued humanitarian support to Abyei. Although the relationship between the Ngok Dinka and the Misreya communities has improved, the establishment of joint administration and security police arrangements in the current context was viewed as further entrenching the status quo without resolving the final status of RBA. In my engagements with the African Union and Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, I reiterated the importance of strengthened AU, IGAD, UN collaboration and coordination on the resolution of RBA's final status. Both the AU and IGAD have expressed their commitments to enhancing our joint efforts in this regard. We will continue to encourage both governments to restart the dialogue as part of efforts to resolve RBA's final status. My office has also continued sustained engagements with the RBA High-Level Committee, co-chairs of the RBA Joint Oversight Committee from both countries, and other relevant stakeholders to support preparations for renewed bilateral dialogue on RBA. These discussions have also focused on the need for both governments to make progress against the benchmarks linked to UNISFA's mandate renewal and address prevailing security dynamics that risk impeding political progress. In this regard, I maintained close coordination with the UNISFA acting head of mission and AMIS leadership to ensure coherent political outreach on RBA-related issues. Mr. President, South Kordofan and the Blue Nile states continue to be affected by the war in Sudan, and they are part of the theater of intensified fighting to control the Elevate to Deni Road linking South Kordofan with North Kordofan, a major logistic access. The fighting in Blue Nile states has also expanded to Kumok, a border town, which was captured by the ISF in March this year. Due to this intensified fighting, critical infrastructure in South Kordofan and the Blue Nile has been destroyed, and the humanitarian situation has deteriorated. Aid delivery has been hindered, and the population is facing acute food insecurity and malnutrition. The two states are particularly vulnerable to the disruptions of agricultural production due to combined effects of climate change and war. In line with UN Security Council Resolution 2046, I will continue to support efforts to resolve outstanding issues from the Comprehensive Peace Agreement between Sudan and South Sudan. I will continue to provide support to the personal envoy of the Secretary General for Sudan, the African Union, and IGAD, as well as other partners in their ongoing efforts to end the war in Sudan and to initiate a political process that should also include South Kordofan and the Blue Nile states. I will also continue to engage with the governments of Sudan and South Sudan to restart dialogue on the final status of RBA and work with all stakeholders to encourage progress on the 5 benchmarks for the renewal of UNISFA's mandate as required by this Council. I thank you for your attention.
I thank Mr. Chong Guang for the briefing. I now give the floor to those Council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to our briefers. The United States is frustrated to be back here again, discussing 2 governments that lack the conviction to use UNISFA as an opportunity to consolidate peace. The United States is deeply troubled that neither the ABA Joint Oversight Committee nor the Joint Political and Security Mechanism convened during the reporting period. We spent considerable time urging both governments in UNISFA's mandate to meet and engage through meaningful dialogue to make progress on the security, political, and administrative arrangements. Progress on all benchmarks is not optional. It is essential to maintain our support for this mission's mandate. We cannot want peace more than the parties themselves. Colleagues, this is common sense. Without resumption of the joint political and security mechanism and continued security guarantees from both governments, the demilitarization framework established in 2011 risks becoming meaningless at a moment that is critically important for Sudan, South Sudan, and the wider region. Full demilitarization of the Abyei area remains unachieved. South Sudan's forces and Sudan's rapid support forces continue to violate the demilitarized zone through unauthorized checkpoints, restricted movement, and interference with civilian life, undermining the zone's purpose. This situation cannot continue. The United States calls upon all parties to cease interference with the civilian population and uphold their obligations under the 2011 agreement. We demand that all unauthorized forces and armed groups immediately withdraw from the Abyei administrative area and Kadugli and vacate occupied civilian structures and UN facilities. These are commitments both governments made and must honor. The United States remains deeply concerned that government authorities have yet to establish the Abyei Police Service. UN police deployment remains well below authorized levels due to visa restrictions. Community protection committees, staffed by volunteers, bear the primary responsibility for law enforcement. These are not sustainable arrangements. The United States calls upon the governments of Sudan and South Sudan to enable UN police deployment. Establishing the Abyei Police Service remains the parties' responsibilities under their agreement and this Council's benchmarks. The UN cannot do this for them. Peace in Abyei requires both governments to implement their commitments, resume bilateral engagement, and take concrete steps towards demilitarization and establishing formal governance and security institutions. People in Abyei have waited long enough, and quite frankly, this Council should be exhausted by the cycle of delay and inaction by the host governments. Thank you.
I thank the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Liberia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3 members, namely the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Somalia, and my own country, Liberia. We thank ASG Matapobi and Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Kwan Song, for their briefings, and we take note of the Secretary General's report on the situation in Abyei. For the A3, Abyei represents a test of whether unresolved political questions in Africa are managed through dialogue or allowed to slide back into violence. The A3 remains deeply concerned by the continued lack of progress on the political process regarding the final status of Abyei. The report speaks to a region at a breaking point and reminds us that people of Abyei continue to pay the price for decisions delayed and commitments unmet. Abyei is a territory that links communities, cultures, and livelihoods. Its instability reverberates beyond the borders, affecting both Sudan and South Sudan. The absence of sustained dialogue between Sudan and South Sudan and the non-functioning of key mechanisms such as the Joint Political and Security Mechanism and the Abyei Joint Oversight Committee continue to impede progress. This deterioration reflects the absence of credible political horizons and the resulting vacuum that armed actors are exploiting. In this regard, we underscore that there is no alternative to a political solution. We call on all parties to engage constructively, including through the resumption of dialogue under the auspices of the African Union with the support of IGAD and the United Nations. African-led solutions remain central to African peace. At the same time, the Council cannot be indifferent. We are alarmed by the deterioration of the security situation in Abyei. The continued presence of unauthorized armed actors in violation of the area's demilitarized status is unacceptable. We are particularly concerned by reports of intercommunal violence, the proliferation of small arms, and rising criminality that further exacerbate insecurity and place civilians at risk. Abyei was meant to be demilitarized, and that commitment must be respected. In this regard, the A3 advances 3 clear priorities. First, Abyei must return to its demilitarized status, and all unauthorized forces must withdraw without delay. Second, Sudan and South Sudan must urgently reactivate the AJOC and the JPSM as the only viable channels for preventing escalation and restoring confidence. Third, the protection of civilians and United Nations personnel, including full accountability for all attacks on peacekeepers, must remain non-negotiable. We strongly condemn the drone attack of 13 December against UN personnel, which resulted in the tragic loss of life among the Bangladeshi contingent. We extend our deepest condolences to the families of the victims and to the troop contributing country. We reiterate that attacks against United Nations peacekeepers may constitute war crimes, and those responsible must be held accountable. Africa knows the cost of protracted conflict, and that silence and inaction only deepen instability. Mr. President, in this challenging context, UNISFA remains indispensable. The mission continues to play a critical role in maintaining stability, protecting civilians, facilitating humanitarian access, and supporting dialogue. However, we note with concern the growing operational constraints facing the mission, including restrictions on its freedom of movement, logistical challenges, and the impact of resource limitations. These challenges are further compounded by the disruption of the Joint Border Verification Monitoring Mechanism, which remain a key confidence-building tool between the two countries. We stress that UNISFA cannot substitute for political will. Sustainable peace in Abyei ultimately depends on the commitment of Sudan and South Sudan to resolve their differences through dialogue. We also highlight the concerning humanitarian situation marked by displacement, limited access to basic services, and increased vulnerability of communities. The absence of functioning rule of law institutions, including the Abyei Police Service, further compounds these challenges. In the immediate term, the Abyei Police Service must be established as agreed, supported by the rapid deployment of UN police at authorized strength. The A3 reiterates its concern regarding approaches that seek to link the future of the mission to benchmarks that are largely outside the control of UNISFA. While progress by the parties is essential, the mission's mandate should be guided by the realities on the ground and the need to ensure stability, rather than conditionality that may risk premature adjustments. In this regard, we underscore the importance of maintaining adequate support and resources for UNISFA to effectively implement its mandate. The humanitarian situation also demands urgent attention. Displacement is rising, basic services are declining, and funding shortfalls are leaving dangerous gaps. We call on member states to meet their financial obligations. Peacekeeping and protection cannot be sustained on promises alone. In conclusion, we call on the parties to demonstrate renewed political will, to resume dialogue, and to take concrete steps toward the demilitarization of Abyei. A3 remains committed to supporting efforts aimed at achieving a just, peaceful, and lasting solution for Abyei. We urge action now because the cost of delay is counted in lives. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Liberia speaking on behalf of A3. Now I give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
Mr. President, at the outset, I would like to congratulate you for presiding over the Council during this month. And I wish you and the delegation of China all success. I also thank you for your kind words. Mr. President, I would like to thank Ms. Marta Pobe, Assistant Secretary General for Africa, and Mr. Kwang Kong, UN Secretary General Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, for their valuable briefings. We also welcome the participation of the representative of the Republic of Sudan and the representative of South Sudan in this meeting. Mr. President, last month we listened to a briefing by Lieutenant General Ganesh Kumar, Acting Head of Mission and Force Commander of UNISFA, who indicated that the situation in the Abyei area remains relatively stable, yet unpredictable, amid continued violations of the 2011 agreement on temporary arrangements for the administration and security of the Abyei area. In this context, we would like to highlight 4 key points. First, the Kingdom of Bahrain affirms that achieving stability in Sudan and South Sudan is a fundamental pillar for consolidating peace and security in the region, and for creating favorable conditions to reach a sustainable solution for the Abyei area. What we have heard today underscores the urgent need to strengthen confidence-building efforts among the parties concerned and to accelerate ongoing efforts. Accordingly, we urge the parties to intensify serious efforts to meet the benchmarks outlined in Security Council Resolution 2802 and to fully implement cooperation agreements and security arrangements, including the establishment of the Abyei Police Service. We also encourage the United Nations and the African Union to continue supporting the facilitation of meetings of the Joint Political and Security Mechanism between Sudan and South Sudan at the earliest possible time. Second, the Kingdom of Bahrain expresses its concern over the Secretary General's report on the rise of violence in Abyei as a result of intercommunal conflict, the proliferation of weapons and landmines, and the presence of unauthorized armed individuals controlling civilian facilities. We are witnessing a serious deterioration in the demilitarized border area. This has led, for the first time, to the suspension of the full field presence of the Joint Border Verification and Monitoring Mechanism. This is a worrying indication of increasing instability between Sudan and South Sudan, with broader humanitarian and security implications. The increasing use of drones is also a source of concern. It presents new challenges that require a more coordinated and effective international response. In this context, the Kingdom of Bahrain emphasizes the need to translate formal assurances provided by the relevant parties into a tangible reality and to ensure that the Abyei area remains demilitarized in accordance with the 2011 agreement and the Status of Forces Agreement and in line with international law. Third, the Kingdom of Bahrain commends UNISFA's role and the contributions of troop contributing countries in supporting peace and security in the Abyei area, despite limited resources and the declining operational capacities of some mission components. We also welcome the continued regular engagement between the mission and the governments of Sudan and South Sudan, local communities, and humanitarian actors. At the same time, the Kingdom of Bahrain condemns the obstruction and attacks targeting the mission and its facilities, which undermine the mission's ability to discharge its mandate and to effectively respond to humanitarian needs. In this regard, we stress the importance for all parties to ensure the protection of humanitarian personnel and facilities in accordance with relevant international laws and instruments. In conclusion, Mr. President, despite ongoing challenges, including the influx of displaced persons and refugees, pressure on livelihoods, the suspension of local community support projects, and the spread of misinformation that threatens the continuity of the mission's work, the Kingdom of Bahrain recommends community dialogue structures, particularly initiatives led by women and youth. These initiatives play a positive role in peace building by enhancing communication, mediation, by reducing violence, contributing to the protection of civilians, and facilitating access to essential services. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Bahrain. Now I'll give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'd like to congratulate China on assuming the presidency of the Council, and we wish you success as you lead the work of the Council this month. And you can be assured of our full cooperation. Panama would like to thank Assistant Secretary General for Africa, Martha Poby, and the Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Guang Kong, for their valuable updates on the situation in Abyei and the work of the United Nations Interim Security Force for Abyei. Abyei continues to be a territory of profound political and symbolic significance for relations between Sudan and South Sudan. Nevertheless, the absence of a lasting resolution regarding its status remains a central factor of tension and instability between both parties. In the current context, marked by the conflict in Sudan and political uncertainty in South Sudan, it is imperative to reinvigorate the bilateral political process in order to move toward a definitive resolution of the status of Abyei. Panama notes with concern the worsening of the security situation, the persistence of armed actors, the proliferation of weapons, and the presence of Sudanese and South Sudanese forces in the area constitute clear violations of Abyei's demilitarized status. Likewise, restrictions on freedom of movement, together with the logistical and operational challenges, continue to limit the capacity of UNISFA and the Joint Border Verification and Monitoring Mechanism to effectively carry out their mandates. In this regard, Panama emphasizes the need for the parties involved to fully cooperate with the mission, respecting its mandate and the Status of Forces Agreement, and ensuring the safety of the civilian population and peacekeeping personnel. And we would echo what was expressed by this Council in its press statement of December 19, 2025, when we unanimously condemned the drone attacks carried out on December 13 against the UNISFA logistics base in Kurugli, which resulted in the tragic loss of 6 Bangladeshi peacekeepers. These acts, which may constitute war crimes, represent a grave violation of international law and demonstrate the growing risks being faced by the mission. We reiterate the importance of ensuring that those responsible are held accountable before the law. On the humanitarian front, the situation remains critical. Recurrent displacement driven by inter-communal violence and the impact of conflicts in the region continue to severely affect the civilian population. While UNISFA plays a key role in facilitating humanitarian access and providing security at strategic points, current financial limitations, including a 15% reduction in its budget, are seriously affecting its operational capacity. This situation not only delays police deployment, but has also reduced the United Nations presence in Abyei, creating gaps in humanitarian response, peace-building efforts, and the provision of basic services, while also preventing any possibility for preventive diplomacy to avoid further escalation of the conflict. In line with the strategic review of UNISFA shared with this Council in 2025, we consider it essential to preserve the mission's political role, strengthening the protection of civilians, optimizing the use of resources, and adjusting monitoring mechanisms to current realities. Mr. President, Panama positively values the recent visit in January 2026 by the Military Staff Committee of the Security Council to the Abyei region, which contributes to a better understanding of the conditions and needs on the ground. This Council has historically agreed on the importance of UNISFA and of the joint mechanism for the stability of Abyei. In this context, Panama reiterates the need for the Council to maintain its support for the mission and urges the parties to fulfill their obligations, advance the demilitarization of the area, and immediately address the security situation. The mission plays an essential role, but it cannot replace the political will of the parties. Only through a genuine commitment to dialogue, respect for existing agreements, and with the support of the United Nations will it be possible to move toward a peaceful solution for the benefit of the people of Abyei. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Panama. Now I'll give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and congratulations on assuming the presidency for the month of May. I thank Assistant Secretary General Poby and Special Envoy Song for their briefings today. I will make 3 points. First, the United Kingdom underscores UNISFA's critical role in protecting civilians and maintaining stability in a fragile environment. It is essential that UNISFA is able to deliver its mandate in full. We are concerned by continued restrictions on UNISFA's freedom of movement, the limited progress by the Sudanese and South Sudanese authorities against key mandate benchmarks agreed last November, and the presence of unauthorized forces in violation of Abiyai's demilitarized status. We also again strongly condemn the drone attacks on the Joint Border Verification and Monitoring Mechanism logistics base in December, which killed 6 Bangladeshi peacekeepers and injured 9 others, and we extend our deepest sympathies to their families. We urge accountability and call on all parties to ensure the safety and security of UN personnel and premises in accordance with international law. Beyond this tragic human cost, the attack has also led to the first complete suspension of the mechanism's physical presence since its creation, which has significantly impacted border monitoring and demilitarization. Second, we remain concerned at the acute humanitarian and protection situation in Abyei. More than 20,000 people are currently displaced in the region, and access constraints are limiting the delivery of vital assistance. We are also deeply concerned by reports of a pattern of conflict-related sexual violence, including against children. We call on all actors to allow safe and unhindered humanitarian access and to protect civilians, in line with international law. And third, it is critical that progress is made against the benchmarks agreed in Resolution 2802. The continued failure to convene joint mechanisms and delays to police deployments are deeply concerning. We urge Sudan and South Sudan to re-engage in dialogue and take concrete steps towards demilitarization and agreed governance arrangements. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom. Now I give the floor to the representative of France.
Mr. President,